The public gallery at Aldenmore University's faculty grievance panel was not meant to hold a school group. It held 17 high school students that Tuesday morning because their civics teacher, Mrs. Prout, had written 3 letters to 3 different administrators before anyone said yes. She believed her students should see an institution correct itself. She had chosen this hearing with care. They filed in quietly, 11 girls and 6 boys, most of them wearing the same navy hoodie, a few gripping spiral notebooks. They took the second and third rows of the gallery benches. Mrs. Prout sat at the end of the row nearest the aisle, coat folded in her lap, reading glasses already on. The hearing room smelled of old wood and radiator heat. Morning light came through tall, narrow windows along the west wall and fell in pale columns across the panel table, where 5 faculty members sat with water glasses and yellow legal pads. The room was formal without being grand. That was the point of a place like this, not grandeur, but process. The professor walked in at 8:52. She was not a tall woman. She wore a dark blazer over a cream blouse, and she carried a single manila folder flat against her side. She took the respondent's chair at the near end of the long table, set the folder down without opening it, and folded her hands. A girl in the second gallery row whispered something to the boy beside her. Mrs. Prout touched the girl's arm once lightly, and the whispering stopped. The professor had not looked up. She did not appear to need the room to acknowledge her. The department chair entered 2 minutes later with his legal representative, a trim man in a charcoal suit who arranged 4 tabbed binders on the table with practiced efficiency. The department chair himself was broad-shouldered, somewhere past 60, with the careful manner of a man accustomed to being the senior voice in any room he entered. He nodded to the panel members by name. He did not acknowledge the professor. Panel chair Dr. Renata Halsworth called the session to order at 9 o'clock exactly. She read the procedural preamble in a level, unhurried voice. The complaint before the panel had been filed 6 weeks prior by the department chair under the university's academic conduct and integrity statute. The nature of the complaint: that a tenured professor of literary history had submitted, over a period of 11 years, scholarship that misrepresented the origins of its core arguments, that the published work in question was not, in the department chair's formal language, fully her own. One of the boys in the gallery wrote the phrase down, fully her own. The department chair's representative opened the first binder. The department chair began to speak. He was precise. He had done this before, not this exactly, but the performance of certainty before an institutional body. He cited publication dates. He referenced a 2019 internal review that he himself had commissioned, which had found, in his words, significant overlap between the professor's landmark 2011 monograph and a set of archival materials she had documented in her own fieldwork notes, materials that, he argued, had been drawn upon without adequate attribution, in a way that blurred the line between primary source and original scholarship. He read 2 sentences from the internal review's summary aloud, slowly, as if the pace itself were evidence. He spoke about the university's standing in the field of literary history and what it meant, reputationally, for the institution's graduate program if questions like these were left unexamined. He gestured once toward the professor without looking at her, the gesture of a man indicating a problem rather than a person. He called her methodology, at best, unconventional. He said the word unconventional with the particular emphasis of a man who meant something much worse. He said that her credentials, while formally adequate, had never been subjected to the kind of scrutiny that the university's reputation now required. He sat back when he finished, and his legal representative produced a second tabbed summary and passed copies to each panel member with the smooth rhythm of a team that had rehearsed. Formally adequate. Mrs. Prout's students were very still. The professor had not moved. Her hands remained folded on the table. She was looking at a point somewhere just above the panel's water glasses, and her expression was the same expression she had worn when she walked in, attentive, composed, and entirely untroubled. It was not a performance. The students had seen performances. This was something different. This was a woman who had already decided what the truth was and had arrived to let the room find out. The department chair's representative concluded the opening statement at 9:23. Dr. Halsworth thanked them and turned to the professor. "Professor," she said, "you have the floor." The professor did not stand. She did not open her folder immediately. She said, in a voice that was quiet enough that the gallery leaned forward to hear it clearly, "I'd like to ask the panel to verify 2 documents before I say anything else. I think it will save everyone time." Dr. Halsworth said, "Go ahead." The professor opened the manila folder. She removed 2 pages and slid them to the center of the table. "The first," she said, "is the entry for my 2011 monograph in the National Scholarly Registry of Published Works, the registry that every accredited academic press is required to file with upon publication. It carries the submission date, the manuscript registration number, and the authenticated list of primary sources as declared at the time of submission. The second is the original peer review acceptance letter from the journal's editorial board, dated March 2010, 14 months before publication, which contains the board's written assessment of the manuscript's source documentation. I would ask the panel chair to read both aloud." The room was quiet. The department chair's representative looked at the binders. He did not reach for them. One of the panel members, a silver-haired woman in a green cardigan, was already leaning toward the documents. She picked up the first page, held it briefly, and passed it to Dr. Halsworth. Dr. Halsworth read it. She read it twice. Then she turned to the panel member at her left, a younger man with wire-rimmed glasses, and said, "Pull the National Scholarly Registry. The entry number is printed at the top." He opened his laptop. The room waited. Mrs. Prout's students did not move. One girl had stopped writing entirely. She was just watching. It took 4 minutes. The registry search required a login that the panel member had to retrieve from a shared folder on his laptop. He typed carefully, without rushing, and the sound of his keystrokes was the only noise in the room. One of the students in the gallery had stopped breathing audibly. The panel member with the laptop looked up. He turned the screen slightly so Dr. Halsworth could see it. She leaned in, studied it for a long moment without expression, then sat back. She picked up the second document, the peer review acceptance letter, and read it in full, her lips moving faintly on certain phrases. Then she set it down flat on the table and looked at the department chair. "The registry entry is confirmed," Dr. Halsworth said. "The manuscript registration number matches the published monograph. The primary source documentation logged at the time of submission is identical to the documentation cited in the published work. The archival materials that form the basis of this complaint are listed, in full, as authenticated primary sources in the registry entry, declared by the professor at the time of submission and verified by the press. The peer review board's 2010 acceptance letter notes, specifically, that the manuscript's handling of primary fieldwork sources was reviewed and found to meet the journal's standards for original scholarship." She paused. "The 2019 internal review this complaint relies upon appears not to have consulted the registry entry or the acceptance letter." The word "appears" landed in the room like a heavy door closing. The department chair's representative straightened his binders. The department chair himself had gone very still. He was looking at the panel table's surface. His broad shoulders had not changed position, but something in the room had registered a shift. The gallery felt it before it was named. The boy who had been writing set his pen down. Dr. Halsworth addressed the full panel. "I'll put my finding on the record. The complaint filed under Academic Conduct and Integrity Statute alleges misrepresentation of scholarly origins in the professor's published work. The National Scholarly Registry entry, publicly available and authenticated, directly contradicts the factual basis of that allegation. The peer review record further confirms that the manuscript sourcing was examined and approved by the editorial board prior to publication. There is no evidentiary basis for the complaint as filed. She folded her hands. The complaint is dismissed. The department chair opened his mouth. His representative put a hand on his arm once, and he closed it again. I will further note, Dr. Halsworth continued, that the internal review cited in the complaint was commissioned by the same individual who filed it, the department chair, and was conducted without consultation of the registry, without notification to the professor, and without following the preliminary review procedures required by the Academic Conduct Statute before a formal complaint may be filed. That is a procedural violation. It is on the record. She picked up her pen. The panel will enter a formal written censure of the department chair for filing a complaint that failed to meet the evidentiary standard required by statute, and that was conducted in violation of the department's own preliminary procedures. The censure will be entered into the university's permanent personnel record. She wrote as she spoke. The scratch of the pen was audible in the gallery. I am also referring this matter to the Office of Academic Integrity for a formal review of the 2019 internal process, who commissioned it, who conducted it, and whether its conclusions were reached in good faith. That referral will be filed this afternoon. She looked up. We are adjourned. The room moved, chairs scraped. The department chair's representative began to gather binders with quick mechanical movements. The panel members rose and spoke in low voices to one another. The professor did not rush. She retrieved her 2 documents from the center of the table, placed them back in the manila folder, and closed it with the same flat press of her palm she had used to open it. She rose without theater. A panel member, the silver-haired woman in the green cardigan, crossed the room toward her and extended her hand. The professor shook it once and said something the gallery could not hear. Whatever it was, the panel member nodded slowly, the way people nod when the right words have finally been said in a room that needed them. In the gallery, no one had moved yet. Mrs. Prout was looking at her students. She had taught civics for 22 years. She knew the difference between a lesson and an experience, and she had brought this group here today for the second kind. She had hoped for something instructive. She had not expected this. The department chair still at the table, reading nothing, touching nothing, the formal censure already written and the referral already on its way to a file she would never see the inside of, and the professor walking toward the door without hurry, the manila folder under her arm, her expression the same as when she had arrived. Mrs. Prout said quietly to the row of students, "That is what the rules are for." A girl in a navy hoodie, the one who had stopped writing and simply watched, turned to look at her teacher. She didn't even raise her voice, she said. It was not quite a question. No, Mrs. Prout said, she didn't need to. They filed out of the gallery in the same quiet order they had entered, blinking in the corridor light. The building was ordinary around them, bulletin boards with posted schedules, a water fountain, the smell of floor wax. The extraordinary thing had happened inside a room that looked like 100 other meeting rooms, and it had happened through paperwork and a registry entry and a pen on a legal pad. No one had been harmed. No one had raised a hand. The woman who had been called unqualified had placed 2 documents on a table and waited for the room to read them. One of the boys held the stairwell door for Mrs. Prout. She thanked him. He said, without quite meaning to say it out loud, "I didn't know it could work like that." She looked at him. 22 years of civics, and this was still the sentence she lived for. "It doesn't always," she said, "but when it does, it's because somebody kept the record clean." They walked out into the gray morning, the kind of morning that asks nothing of you and gives you nothing back, the kind that will not make the news, and the students were quieter than they had been walking in. Not the quiet of boredom or confusion. The quiet of people who have seen a room recalibrate itself, methodically, according to its own stated rules, and found it to be, against all expectation, enough. Down the hall behind them in the wood-paneled hearing room, the formal censure was drying on the panel chair's legal pad, and the referral was already being typed. The professor was gone. The department chair sat alone at the long table for another few minutes before his representative came back in and said it was time to go. He went. The manila folder was already 2 buildings away, under the arm of a woman who had known what it contained for 11 years and had simply waited for the right room to open it.